Ellie's got it on. Good job. Ellie stared up. She said, I can't see. You know, we think a lot about, I always have this idea, what you were talking about. We don't have control, God does. And God has always given us what we need at any time. And I think the world has a hard time with that. He gives us the ability to stand up for him and to do things and say things. And many through the years have been put in prison for what they said. Many today are being killed for what they believe, what they're standing up for. In order to have that ability to do that, the only way we can do that is what we get from God. And we're talking about what was the source of Samson's strength, because I love talking about David and how David killed Goliath and how he slung the stones. But Samson it was a great story, and it was a very sad story in a lot of ways because of things that happened in his life. In Judges 13:5, an angel gives a promise in command to Moses' wife, you will become pregnant and have a son, whose head is never to be touched by a razor, because the boy is to be a Nazarite, dedicated to God. So we must have a lot of Nazarite children today running around, because there's a lot of guys who never cut their hair and never been touched by anything. When you go down the street, many times I look, I say, I got to see the front. Let me tell them it's a girl or a guy. Because you really can't tell. In Jeremiah 1:5 it says, before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. And before thou comest out of the womb, I sanctified thee, and I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations. God had a plan for us, even back then. He knew what we were going to go through, and he knew why we were going to go through it. He knew the rebellion that was going to be in our lives. But sometimes that rebellion turned into a voice for God. We began to be willing to speak. We would get angry in school at our teachers and sometimes at other people. And then all of a sudden, sometimes we begin to find God, and we'd be able to stand up for him. And we'd see that spirit, what once was rebellion against the world, as a voice that would come out for God. He said Samson will take the lead in delivering Israel from the hands of the Philistines. Her son was Samson. As an adult, Samson's strength allowed him to tear apart a lion with his bare hands and to defeat men of Philistines with supernatural acts of strength. See, that's what makes me think of David. When David was off tending the sheep, when the lion come up and grabbed one of the lambs, he took it from him. But when the lion came back for a second battle, David killed him with his bare hands. He didn't have weapons. He didn't have sticks or guns or even a hammer. But he tore him apart with the strength that God gave him. The same strength that's available to you and I today. Now, I don't suggest you go and find a lion and see if you can rip him apart, because would your faith allow you to be able to do that? Because our faith today is really what's at risk. We don't have the faith that we need to have. But the Philistines, of course, saw Samson as their mortal enemy. In an attempt to defeat him, some of the Philistine leaders plotted with a lady named Delilah to discover the source of his strength. They said to her, if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him, so we may tie him up and subdue him, each of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver. See, there was a bribe going on. You know, I watched the movie the other day of Samson and Delilah, and Delilah was very remorse in the movie anyway for what she did. Mm-hmm. You know, kind of I think of Judas. When Judas got to 30 pieces of silver, he wanted to give it back. He was angry at himself for what he did, because he had a vision of exposing Christ, and now Christ is going to do what everybody wants him to do. Except God had a plan. There was a plan for Christ's life. And it was not to do what man wanted him to do here. Imagine if you had the biggest guns on the biggest ship, and that was what that ship the Germans had. And they showed it off, and they did things, and they killed a lot of people with it, but eventually the rudder was damaged, and it circled, and they came up and destroyed the ship. So there's always something that can happen. See, our source has to be in the right place. Hey, Samson was an Nazarite. God had a plan for him. Delilah tried 3 times to pry from Samson the secret of the strings. 3 times she failed, as Samson misled her with various stories. Then we read, with such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. He was tired of listening to it. And I think sometimes that happens to us in church. When we listen and we have a situation in our lives, we're going to pray and pray and pray. And maybe it doesn't happen the way we want it to. And eventually we get upset. And eventually we no longer turn to God. We find other gods to go to. I think of the Pharaoh. They had their God. In the movie, he took his son and laid him on that statue. He said, "Can't you do anything?" Don't we do that? Sometimes we turn to the wrong thing and say, "Can't you help me? Can't you do something to help me get through this?" And eventually, we give up. So he told her everything. "No razor has ever been used on my head," he said, "because I've been a Nazarite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become weak as any other man." Now, I don't know that he would have been as weak as every other man, but the strength that he had was unbelievable. But it wasn't his. The Bible says, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me," who gives me what I need. So if this is the way God gave to Samson, God can do the same thing for us. We may not tear lions apart. We may not knock buildings down, but we have the ability to walk in that strength and do whatever it is God has for us to do. There's a plan. The problem is we have a hard time following plans unless it's our own. We go down and we want something, and so we pick out what we want. And God says, "You don't need that." When we first started doing the ministry up here, the church would give us $500 a week. And I go buy food, and I would give out food to people. And the guy said, "No, don't buy any more food. I'll provide." And that was a lot easier to go to the store and buy food and give it out, because then you knew what you had. But then we had to say, okay, we're going to do it his way. And he's never stopped providing. Every time when I buy something now, Elaine says, "I don't know if there's money for it." Yeah, there is. If there's something that we need, God has always given us what we need. He does ask us to be frugal, and I'm not frugal. I look for what I want, and I look at it. The reason I bought a smaller shed than the one I wanted is because the bigger shed wouldn't fit through the gate. I said, "Don't you have a crane?" No, he said a crane is expensive. So we bought the size that we needed. And see, we have to listen to what he tells us, not to what we want. If we had this great big place, like was the Zorn house, because the Zorn house wasn't huge, but it was when you think about what we work through today. It was a 3-bedroom house, and God taught me how to turn it into what we need. And see, we have to learn. And Samson got upset. He got tired of being aggravated with this woman, much I'm sure like the judge who got aggravated with the woman that kept coming to him. She wanted justice. I'm going to give it to her because I'm tired of listening to her. Samson said, "I'm tired of the nagging, so I'm going to just tell her." Well, you do better. After putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair. and so began to subdue him. And his strength left him. The Philistines, who had waiting to pounce, bound Samson, gouged out his eyes, put him in prison where he was forced to work in the mill. Now, this is a man that defeated, 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of an ass? This guy had all the strength in the world, but because of, he couldn't control himself. Don't we have that today? Don't we have the problem sometimes of controlling himself? I told you about the guy, that girl, young girl, going to buy her clothes for college, cut him off. He got aggravated with her and killed her. He couldn't stand the fact of somebody else being in front of him. He wanted to go in when he wanted to go. She wasn't thinking about cutting him off. She was just going to the store to buy clothes. She was doing what every girl would do. She graduated high school. She's getting ready to go to college. She goes into a store to buy clothes. He runs her off the road. Now, she cut him off without even knowledge of what she was doing. He ran her off the road. He pulled out a gun and killed her. Why did he have a gun? Was this something that he intended to do anyway? Was this something that was in his mind all the way, and the enemy was just driving him? He was looking for a reason to do what he did. Samson wasn't. After a time, the Philistines chose to bring Samson out of prison to make sport of him. They had him. He's in a mill. He can no longer hurt them. Why did they bring him out to mock him? Because when you mock God's man or woman, God's still listening. He's still waiting for that man or woman to say, hey, I goofed up. And that's what Samson did. They brought him into an arena during a festival where 3,000 men and women were in attendance. Judges 16:27. Samson rested against the pillars and prayed for God to give him strength one more time. Yeah, he really didn't ask for a lot. He said, give me strength one more time. What the enemy meant for bad, God turned it to good. Genesis 50:20 says, but as for you, you thought evil against me, but God meant it for good to good, to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive. That's all it took. What you were talking, all you got to do is cry out to God. He's willing to listen to you. Samson, the strongest man maybe on earth next to Superman. And his eyes are gouged out. He's been tied up like a donkey to a mill, circling to grind the flour and stuff, the seeds and the powder. They brought him out. They were going to mock him. God never gets happy with people when they do stuff like that. Look what happened to Goliath. He made mock. David was talking about, you're mocking my God. You're not just mocking the people, you're mocking my God. And Samson said, who is it that you would send this little boy out here to fight against me? David said, you come with a spear and javelin, but I came in the name of the Lord. See, David gave glory to where it needed to be. And I don't know if Samson spoke it out loud, but God answered his prayer. In verse 30, then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than when he lived. That's all God wants. Cry out to him. Call out to him. It seems as though Samson's hair was his human source of power, but it's clear from the final event that God was the true ultimate source of his strength. Mm-hmm. Samson's uncut hair was simply the sign that he was obeying God's command. Now, God knows your heart. But Nazarites knew who he was. And God looks down, the hair is gone, so is the strength. God was his source of all his power. But his hair was his witness. Think about that. The sign that he was obeying God's command for him to be a Nazarite. God's strength was the power behind each of the judges, including Samson. So, Think about it, and you're going to take this thing home. What is the sign that you're going to obey God's command? See, we have things. God sees our heart, but there are things that people see. You know, I think of pastors would go into and sit down and booze it up. When their day off, they will go in and drink. Drinking, is it bad? Not necessarily. But is it a stumbling block? What if somebody from your congregation came in that had a problem with an addiction and they saw you drinking? That must be okay to do. Maybe not all the time, but at least once in a while. What has God asked you to do daily? And there are things that God requires of us. He asks us things daily of things to do. When you go places, does God ever speak? Talk to that one. This is what I want you to tell him. You know, the amazing thing is he doesn't make it hard for us. It's not like we have to figure out what to say. He said, hey, I want you to say this to him. And how can anyone know who you put your faith and trust in? How can they tell? By your life. You know, Samson, because of his strength and because he was a Nazarite, I'm sure he had a good time. I think when the Philistines attacked him, you should have saw the bloody movie with the jawbone of an ass. It was really something to sit here and watch him as these people would come after him. And at one point in the movie, and maybe it happened in real life, there was about 60 men on top of him. They actually had him down to the ground. You can see the cameras underneath, and Samson's like this. And all of a sudden he starts to scream. He said, God, give me the power. And he stood up, and these people went flying. And it could have happened exactly that way. No. God has the ability to do that in us. Mm-hmm. But at the same point in time, whether you're talking to one person or 10, it doesn't make any difference. Mike used to come here. Mike used to talk. Sometimes I'll be talking to this person here, but those people over there listening. Sometimes they're the one that gets healed. Sometimes they're the one that actually gets saved in the midst of me talking here. We don't know. But God has the ability to give you the strength to do these things. And where does your strength come from? See, we all have a source of strength. Some are bodybuilders. They work out. And they muscle up. Have you ever run into a very muscular person and watch them whine sometimes at the smallest cuts? I think of the princess who sat on all the mattresses and felt the stone underneath the pea. We don't know what people's problems are. We don't know what they're afraid of. Afraid of the dark? Afraid of loud noises? Maybe there's somebody in their life that used to scare them to death, and if they saw them again, they'd be exactly the same way. Maybe they haven't outgrown childhood fears that they have. I know a lot of people that are scared to death of heights. There's a name for it. They're scared of different things. There are names for all kinds of stuff. They've never outgrown those fears. And yet they're adults. They work out. They look good. They dress good. Their hair is just exactly as it should be according to them. Do you ever have guys take a girl in the car and have her hair blow in the wind? And they're like this, trying to hold it still. They want it to stay just like it was because that's when they were at their best. That's what they felt they were at their best. Yeah. See, Samson had the ability to do so much. And yet he did at the end. When he finally realized, when he finally said, Lord, forgive me. Let me do this one more time. Give me that strength. Did he know that he was going to bring the whole building down? Did he know that everybody in the building would be killed? They said he pushed. He leaned on a pillar. There were 2 pillars and he pushed. Those were the 2 pillars that held the building up. Those were, what do you call that? There's a wall, a load-bearing wall. He knew that if this comes down. No, I don't think he did. But he knew that whatever God gave him to do, whatever was in his heart, if it pleased God, then God would give him the strength to do it. And he did. See, we got to think of ourselves. Samson was an unusual person in the Bible because of who he was. David was an unusual person in the Bible because of what he did, but we all have the same ability. Maybe in different ways. Maybe we're going to reach different kinds of people. We don't know. Maybe you're going to reach the person sitting next to you. Maybe you're going to reach a family member. Maybe you're going to reach somebody that you don't even know. Maybe you're talking to this person and those people are listening. We don't know. And maybe, just maybe, when you begin to think and act like that, your faith grows stronger. Sometimes we don't think we have the ability to do things. You ever been in the sport? Football is a great sport because when people begin to clap and people begin to cheer and it's the last play of the game, there's one more opportunity. That person gets that ball and now they're doing something they've never done before. They're running faster and harder. And now all the people around them on the field are blocking for them. Maybe they don't even like this person, but they do want to win the game. And all of a sudden you've got that group of men together and they begin to fight as one. See, God has always tried to teach us we do things with him, but he wants us to be an army. And how can we be an army unless we work together? Mm-hmm. That's his intention. It's intention to get his church not into a building. Don't spend all your money on a fancy building, a fancy cushy seats and air conditioning. Take what you have and give it to him. Because God always gives back greater than what you can give. It's a hard concept for people to get a hold of. But the woman with 2 mites, that's all she had. She gave it all. She trusted. And she believed. So how far do you trust? What has God given you to do? And how far are you going to trust him with what you have?